Good morning from Warramai Country. I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. It was brought to my attention that I may have missed a milestone yesterday. It was Equal Pay Day in Australia. Now that's where we mark the symbolic date that marks how far into the next financial year that women, on average, have to work in order to earn the amount that men made in the previous financial year. So from the end of June to August 17, we finally caught up. But if we know the gender pay gap exists, why don't we just close it? If there are things we can do to equal the playing field, why don't we? We'll get into that in a tick. But of course, we need to find out what's been happening while you were sleeping. It's Tuesday, August 18. Several Sydney Swans players are being investigated over an alleged sexual assault at a hotel in Melbourne. Victoria Police were at the Pullman Hotel in East Melbourne yesterday, where the Swans team stayed after defeating Essendon at the MCG, confirming they were investigating a report of sexual assault that had happened in the early hours of that morning. Swans Chief Executive Matthew Pavlich confirmed that some of the club's players had been involved in an alleged incident, but refused to say whether any of them had been arrested. He said that the club was extremely shocked and disappointed. One of the 6 men who've accused former radio broadcaster Alan Jones of sexual abuse says he confided in broadcaster Ray Hadley that he'd been subject to unwanted groping and kissing. The conversation came after Hadley told the man that journalist and author Peter Fitzsimons was researching similar allegations about Jones, and seeing as he'd worked with him, wanted to ask some questions. He agreed, allegedly telling Fitzsimons that Jones was a grub who used to grab him. Hadley asked if he wanted to report the abuse and offered to attend a police station with him, but the man said he didn't want anyone to know, swearing the 2GB host to secrecy. He later gave the information to journalist Kate McClymont, who gave him a pseudonym for her article that would eventually lead to Jones's arrest in 2024. The man says he felt he had to stay on Jones's good side as he was so powerful. Even after he left the job and worked for a politician, he was told Jones's influence was still a factor. A warning that this next story may be distressing to anyone who has terminated or lost a pregnancy. Coalition MP Lou O'Brien has introduced a bill to federal parliament requesting comprehensive health care for fetuses who survive abortions. Australia doesn't track or publish a national count of fetuses that show signs of life after an abortion. Data released by the then Queensland Health Minister in 2016 showed in 2015 27 babies of 5 months gestation or more had survived the procedure. A large proportion of those were due to fetal abnormalities, with care individualised to the specific circumstances and informed choices of the family. The bill is similar to those brought by now Nationals leader Matt Canavan and Liberal Senator Alex Antic in 2022, and one by Queensland's Bob Katter in 2024, neither of which gained traction. Mr O'Brien has called for all fetuses that survive medical termination to be recorded as children and their type of death specified, which would allow national statistics to be generated. However, the proposal is unlikely to proceed, with Labor having the majority in the lower house. An Australian teenager has been stabbed in the back after an altercation in a McDonald's in New York. The 19-year-old was in the Midtown restaurant when he got into a dispute with a 25-year-old man who allegedly stabbed him in the back. He was taken to hospital in a stable condition. Detectives investigating the incident say they believe the attack was unprovoked. The alleged attacker is now facing an assault charge. A day after Hero star Hayden Panettiere's passing, the autopsies revealed that the actress suffered no signs of trauma that could have contributed to her death. The coroner's report says the cause of death remains pending further investigation. The report also contained details of the emergency responders' experience, saying first responders and a medical emergency services arrived on scene and located a female in cardiac arrest. EMS personnel initiated advanced cardiac life support measures. However, resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful, and the individual was pronounced deceased at 2:32 p.m. A police spokesperson has confirmed that there seems to be no signs of foul play or suspicious circumstances. Panettiere had spoken openly in her memoir about her traumatic birth experience and subsequent postnatal depression, as well as her battles with substance abuse. And if you are struggling and feel like you don't have options, you absolutely do. Call Lifeline on 13 11 14. They're standing by right now to help you out. With the 60-day window for the peace talks to be discussed after Iran and the US signed the 15-point Memorandum of Understanding now closing, progress towards peace talks and a resumption of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz have both ground to a halt. There's no sign that either party is moving towards ending the conflict that the US and Israel launched on February 28. US President Donald Trump wrote on social media, "The number one goal, and always will be, that Iran cannot have in any way, shape or form a nuclear weapon. Thank you for your attention to this matter." A senior Iranian official has told Reuters that Iranian entities must be prepared to escalate tensions in the Strait of Hormuz and wider region, adding the country's forces would conduct a timely and precise military attack to break the US naval blockade if diplomacy fails. Princess Eugenie has revealed on social media that her third child's name is Adelaide Elizabeth Anina Brooksbank. Eugenie says the little girl born 2 weeks ago is named in tribute to 3 people we love and admire, past and present. Elizabeth is, of course, in honour of the princess's grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II. The name Adelaide is understood to have been inspired by both Queen Adelaide and Maria Adelaide of Portugal. Anina is a personal connection the couple hasn't revealed, only to say that the names reflect both English and Portuguese history, two places we love and call home. Adelaide's birth is a rare one for the UK's royal family, having been born overseas. Another is Prince Harry's daughter Lilibet, who was born in California. Those are today's top stories, folks. Next, Equal Pay Day's just been and gone, but what are we actually doing to close it? The latest data shows that the gender pay gap in Australia has narrowed a touch in recent years, but it does depend on whose data you're looking at. The one we base Equal Pay Day on is that compiled by the WGEA, or Workplace Gender Equality Agency. They look at total remuneration of all employees in employers with 100 or more staff. That shows the gender pay gap on average nationally is down 0.7% from the 2023-24 financial year, where it was 21.8%, to the 2024-25 financial year at 21.1%. Now, translated, that means the national average total remuneration gender pay gap in Australia sits at 11.2%, meaning women earn an average of 88.8 cents for every dollar that men earn. The 2026 report found that the majority of employers reduced their gender pay gap year on year, with more employers having a gender pay gap in the target range of -5 to +5%, and slightly more women have moved into the upper quartile of earners. But what a lot of people confuse the gender pay gap with is equal pay for equal job. If you are doing a job in a workplace and someone doing the exact same job at the exact same workplace is getting paid more simply because of gender, then that is against the law. The gender pay gap is actually the culmination of systemic and structural workplace drivers that overall lead to women earning less. Things like the fact that female-dominated industries like childcare and education are often lower paid, while male-dominated fields like mining, finance and tech pay more. The WGEA calls this entrenched workforce gender segregation. Women are often missing from the boardroom too, with men consistently overrepresented in leadership positions, which pay more. And even when women are in positions of leadership, they are less likely to be in positions that lead to the very top job or attract the highest pay packets. And of course, there's domestic work. Women still do the majority of unpaid caring and domestic work, which leaves us less able to work full-time or overtime, to travel or pursue roles that take us out of the home for long periods of time. Women also stop work for periods of time to have children and will then often return in a part-time capacity. The WGEA has in the past few years published the gender pay gap data of major Australian companies with more than 100 employees, and they found that Qantas at 40.1% and Virgin at 45.1% have some of the largest pay gaps in the country. Notably, the current CEO of Qantas, Vanessa Hudson, does not get paid as much as her predecessor, Alan Joyce, did. Her base pay of $1.6 million is 25% lower than Joyce's was. And even if you add in her long and short-term incentives to reach her performance targets, her remuneration remains below her predecessors. But to be fair, Virgin's new CEO Dave Emerson's base salary is also lower than previous CEO Jane Hardlicker's at $1.3 million compared to $1.8 million. Jane also cashed in after leaving because she'd taken a lower base wage in exchange for equity tied to when the airline went public again. And when it did, her shares skyrocketed, earning her a sweet $50 million payout. Qantas and Virgin definitely aren't the biggest gap though. Healthcare specialist Sydney Ultrasound for Women has a 79.2% gender pay gap, and Artisan Athletics is $682. But while these are the paydays of our lives of the rich and famous, for the majority of working women, the gender pay gap persists. Victorian Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner Dr Nikki Vincent is part of the team that has just released the State of Gender Equality in Victoria's Public Sector 2026 report, and that looks at workforce data from almost 500,000 Victorian public sector employees. Welcome to the Solo Bureau, Nikki.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
I guess we need to establish first what the Victorian Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner actually does. Can you give us an outline of what your role is?
Yeah, sure. So I implement the Gender Equality Act in Victoria, which is the first act of its kind, actually, and still the only act of its kind throughout Australia. This is about making sure that the public sector, in the broadest sense possible, so it covers your usual public service, but also other organisations that fit around that, plus all local councils and all universities in Victoria. So it's a much broader public sector than you typically think of. It employs about 500,000 workers, and there are 300 organisations in it. So a lot of organisations, a lot of people affected by the legislation. It puts a positive duty on all of the organisations to promote gender equality in their workplaces, but also in their public policies, programs and services. So whatever they deliver to the public needs to have a gender lens put over it. We collect data every 2 years across 7 key indicators. That's gender composition at all levels, including the governing body, gender pay gap, sexual harassment, recruitment and promotion practices, access to leave and flexibility, and then gendered segregation within the workforce. So that data comes into me every 2 years. We analyse it. They have to report on their progress. They have to make reasonable and material progress on each of those 7 key indicators, and I've got really strong compliance powers. On top of that, they have to also put gender lenses over the work that they do that has a public impact. So it's a lot of work for organisations, but it's important. I mean, we should expect our public sector workplaces to be leading in terms of gender equality.
Well, you did mention that you get a lot of data there, and we'll talk a little bit about the report that data actually solidifies, but gender pay gap is part of that. But your data might look a little bit different than the data, say, Equal Pay Day is based on, as opposed to, say, a report that came out from KPMG, which also has different skewed data on what they see the gender pay gap as. This is where it gets a little bit confusing about what exactly the gender pay gap is in Australia, because it depends on whose data you look at, right?
Yeah, and they're all gender pay gaps, but they're measuring slightly different things. The gender pay gap, a lot of people say it doesn't even exist. Well, it isn't an opinion. It is real, and we do measure it. The important question is what's producing it, or them, and what can we do about those causes. So the gender pay gap isn't the same thing as women being paid less than men for doing exactly the same job. But it tells us about the structure of a workforce, like where women and men work, the occupations they're in, how they're distributed through the organisational levels, and who gets access to senior and more highly remunerated roles, and differences in things like overtime and allowances. And depending on what parts of that you measure, you're going to get different pay gaps. So in our Victorian public sector data, we adjust part-time salaries to their full-time equivalent. So if you work part-time, your salary will be adjusted up to a full-time, so that we only get data for full-time comparisons. So we've got a 15.7% total remuneration gap. So that's not base salary, which the ABS data that's come out is based on base salary. So ours is a total remuneration gap, and it can't simply be dismissed by saying, well, women work less hours, and that's why we've got a pay gap. What that means in practice is that the average woman in Victoria's public sector is getting about $23,000 less than the average man. And in public healthcare, which also comes under our legislation, the pay gap is 29%. And that's for an industry that is over 77% women. And that means the average woman is taking home about $53,000 less than the average man in that sector. And we're seeing there the cumulative effect of things like occupational segregation, career progression, caring and career interruptions, and where women and men are positioned within organisations. So you tend to see women at the lower ends of organisation, lower pay ends of organisations, and men more likely to be in the higher paid, in the more leadership roles, and even in organisations that are largely women. So healthcare, for example, they've got the largest pay gap in the public sector at 29%. So that tells you that although it's a woman-concentrated sector, when men are in that sector, they are earning a lot more than the women.
This is a thing that kind of confuses me. So we know that the gender pay gap exists. We know why it exists. Why don't we do better at closing it?
I think it is shifting. It's very slow. As everyone is very frustrated if that's the work that you do. And that is because a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been dealt with, certainly in the public sector. That's starting to happen. So, you check all the things that you can change. But where it's about the industries where women work that tend to be paid lower, valued lower, the fact that women do take on a lot of the unpaid caring responsibilities, they're likely to have more time out of work, so they're less likely to be progressing at the same rate as men. Those are things you can't fix overnight, right? You can't change entire industries. You also can't change our upbringing, which is very gendered, and little girls learn from a very early age that they're expected to parent, and they need to choose jobs that are more about caring and less about maths and science, and so on. So all of those gender norms come into play that are at play when people choose what they do at universities and the places they end up in, the jobs that they end up in. So the pay gap isn't a simple thing to fix. It's actually going to take a long time to change those things, and that's why we've got to have a concerted effort, continually looking at this and continually trying to impact those structural issues that are very much the gender asbestos. They're baked in, and it's harder to shift those things.
All right, I'm only referring to this stuff as gender asbestos from now on. I think that's my favourite saying.
You know what? That was actually one of our former Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Elizabeth Broderick's saying, and it has stuck with me ever since. She was two Sex Discrimination Commissioners ago, but it's one that stuck with me.
She left an impact.
She did.
Something that did at least go some way to levelling the playing field at some stage was, and it's weird to find silver linings in the pandemic 5 years or 6 years on now, but working from home, when people started to pivot, if they could work from home and did, we found that was such an equaliser where it came to women in the workplace, that being able to be flexible like that so that we can, as much as we would like the domestic and caring roles to be more equal, they are still not. And so working from home made that easier for women to still work and care for children and handle all of the rest of the mental load. And so the Victorian government in particular was sort of on the brink of enshrining work from home legislation until there was a very public and very recent leadership challenge and change. And so that's now been put on the back burner to potentially maybe come in at a later date next year. But would that, you think, have gone some way to actually making that gender pay gap a little bit less wide?
I am very, we know that flexible work is really important, and working from home is one form of flexibility. People of all genders value flexibility. It's almost universal, but the gender difference becomes very clear when we start looking at caring. Among Australians who usually work from home, and that's a lot of Australians now, 8% of women identify childcare or family or caring responsibilities as their main reason for wanting to work from home, and that's compared with about 4.5% of men. So women's rate of selecting that as their main reason for wanting to work from home is about double that of men wanting to work from home, or men's primary reason from working from home. And that is consistent with the broader reality that women continue to carry, the bulk of unpaid care. But I don't think the gender equality solution is simply making it easier for women to do their paid job while continuing to do most of the unpaid work, which is, exactly what you said. We've got to fix that problem as well. The gender equal future is one where women and men have genuine flexibility and care is shared more equally, because I think if you want to move equal pay day earlier in the year, in the calendar, one of the most important levers is actually men taking leave and men working flexibly as well.
I'm going to go ahead and presume the men that listen to this show have already got their socks pulled up, but if they know of a man who has yet to pull said socks up, maybe get onto them to try some sock pulling up at some stage.
I think that's great. What a great idea.
Nikki, thank you so much for helping us understand this a little bit better. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
Thanks for the hang today, team. Appreciate all the info you're all sending me in the DMs. I get so many great story ideas, wonderful feedback, and a whole lot of love from all of you. It is the absolute best part of my day to read through them, and the comments that you leave when you rate and review in your podcast apps too. I'm thinking I should actually start some kind of forum so that you all can chat to each other too if you want to. I'll figure that out and let you know. Until then, have a great time today. I'll catch you tomorrow.